I never meant to teach my husband a lesson, but the night he forgot his phone and his lover's messages lit up my kitchen, something inside me shifted. While they toasted champagne, I sat in the quiet of our home holding the truth he thought I'd never discover. And when he walked out for his meeting, dressed for someone else, I made one small switch that changed everything. By the time his lover was screaming for an ambulance, I was sipping tea in peace. You think you know how this ends, but you don't know the moment I finally chose myself. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. Everyone always said we had the kind of marriage other couples envied. The kind built on steady routines and soft-spoken affection. The kind that looked effortless from the outside. Our neighbors would wave as we stepped onto the porch together each morning. My coworkers would smile when I mentioned how my husband waited for me to finish my nightly skincare routine before locking up the house. Even our family spoke of us as if we lived inside a picture frame. Still polished ideal. And for a long time I believed it too. I kept our home in a way that made people whisper about how lucky he was. Fresh flowers on the dining table, soft lighting in the living room, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of cinnamon because he liked the comfort of it. Every night after dinner, I brewed him the same jasmine tea, placing it beside his recliner before he settled in with the news. He had a particular way of folding the blanket on his lap, smoothing it twice before tucking it under his knees. I knew that rhythm so well I could do it with my eyes closed. His pill routine was another ritual I handled with quiet care. At 9 p.m. sharp, I placed the amber bottle beside his water glass. He would tap the pills into his palm with the same 3 clicks every time. He said it helped him sleep, helped him stay calm, helped him stay steady. I thought I was helping him stay steady too. I thought that's what a wife did. Hold the small pieces together so the larger picture never cracked. On Saturdays, he polished his shoes in the foyer, leaning over them with concentration, brushing in long, even strokes. I used to watch from the hallway, warmed by the familiarity of it. There was something reassuring about a man who cared enough to keep his shoes shining, who believed in presenting himself with dignity. Those were the things that convinced me everything was fine even when little shifts in our life started quietly tugging at my attention. Because the truth is, the first crack wasn't loud. It wasn't even obvious. It appeared in the smallest moment. Barely a sliver. A change in his scent one evening when he came home later than usual. A faint, unfamiliar perfume that didn't belong anywhere in our house. He brushed past me with a distracted smile, already loosening his tie before I could study him further. I told myself it must have been someone he hugged hello or someone who bumped into him in an elevator. I had never been the jealous type. I wore trust like a second skin. But skin, I learned, can be shed without warning. The more I tried to cling to our routines, the more I felt them slipping through my fingers. His tea sat untouched on nights he claimed he was too tired. His shoes remained unpolished some weekends as he rushed out for errands. Even his pill schedule began bending. He would take them earlier, later, sometimes not at all. It was then I realized that a marriage can look perfect from the outside. Right up until the moment you finally really look from the inside. And see everything you've been trying so hard not to notice. It started with a single missed call on a Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that instantly screamed betrayal. Just his phone buzzing on the counter while he was supposedly in a late meeting. I glanced at the screen only because it wouldn't stop vibrating. Unknown number. Then another. Then a third. By the time the 4th call came, the phone finally stopped buzzing, and I stood alone in the kitchen, wondering why my husband's meetings suddenly came with persistent callers who refused to leave voicemails. When he came home, the first thing he did was check his phone. Not greet me. Not kiss my cheek like he used to. Just snatched the phone from the counter and slipped it into his pocket so fast he didn't even notice me watching. He mumbled something about work being hectic, loosened his tie, and walked straight to the shower. His excuses came so automatically, it was as if he had been rehearsing them. Over the next few days, more small things began to fall out of place. He started getting dressed with a kind of energy he hadn't shown in years. carefully ironing his shirts on nights he claimed he had early conference calls. His cologne, one he barely touched for years, suddenly became part of his routine again. He checked his reflection more often. He smiled at his phone in ways he never smiled at me anymore. But the strangest shift was how quickly he started responding to texts. His phone, once casually left on tables and counters, became glued to him. He carried it from room to room, slipping it under his thigh whenever he sat. When it buzzed after midnight one weekend, he pretended not to hear it. I watched his eyes flick toward the sound, then away, like he was trying to pretend the message didn't exist. Or that I didn't notice. I didn't ask questions at first. Suspicion isn't loud. It grows quietly, like a vine wrapping around the edges of your peace. Every time he said he was running late, the vine tugged a little tighter. Every new excuse, traffic, a last-minute project, a client dinner, felt familiar enough to accept, but strange enough to linger in the back of my mind long after he walked out the door. The dinners bothered me the most. He never used to care for business dinners. He said they were full of fake smiles and overpriced steaks. Yet suddenly he was having 2, sometimes 3 a week. He came back smelling faintly of wine he didn't like and food he never ordered at home. One Thursday evening, he rushed out so quickly he forgot the file folder he claimed he needed for the meeting. I noticed it sitting untouched on the entryway table hours later, right where he left it. I remember picking it up, running my fingers over the clean, crisp edges, and wondering what kind of business dinner didn't need the documents he insisted were so important. That was when the tension inside me shifted. No longer a whisper. No longer something I could brush aside. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I started watching the small details. The missed calls, the sudden late nights, the hurried texts he tried to hide behind casual gestures. And with each passing day, the inconsistencies stitched themselves into a pattern I could no longer pretend not to see. He was slipping away. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just quietly enough that someone who wasn't paying attention might have missed it. But I was paying attention now. He had never once forgotten his phone. Not in all the years we'd been together. It was as much a part of his routine as the pills he took at night or the way he double-checked the locks before bed. So when I walked into the kitchen after washing the dishes and saw it sitting on the counter, screen down, charging quietly, I almost called out to him. Almost. He was in the shower. I could hear the steady rush of water through the thin wall, the familiar pattern of his footsteps shifting as he moved around. He always took his time in there. Always hummed the same low tune under his breath. But that night I didn't hear humming. Just water. Just silence. The phone buzzed. I didn't reach for it. Not at first. I simply stood there, drying my hands on a towel, staring at the smooth black rectangle as its screen lit up the dim kitchen. Then it buzzed again. This time, the screen stayed lit just long enough for the name to appear. Red Heart. My breath stopped. Not sharply, but in that slow, stunned way you inhale when you're looking at something that shouldn't exist in your world. Heart emoji. Casual intimacy. Something people use without thinking, but only with people they feel entitled to love openly. The phone buzzed a third time, and the message preview appeared before I could look away. Miss your face already. Tonight wasn't long enough face blowing a kiss. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't gasp. Didn't sink to the floor in melodramatic disbelief. Instead, I stood very still, as if movement would make the moment real. As if stillness could reverse time. The water kept running. A faint thud told me he'd dropped something in the shower. And there I was, staring at a small glowing screen that held the truth he had been hiding behind late dinners, fake meetings, and evasive smiles. Another message arrived. You looked so stressed tonight. Did she suspect anything? A soft, involuntary sound escaped me. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. More like the air leaving a room when a window cracks. My hands felt cold. My heart didn't shatter. It simply tilted like a picture frame knocked slightly askew. He hadn't just lied. He had lived an entirely separate life. One filled with inside jokes, private moments, and someone who wasn't afraid to ask if I was beginning to notice. I thought of the perfume I couldn't place. The sudden polished shoes. The deleted stories on social media. The unexplained meetings that didn't require documents. All the pieces that had been floating around me for weeks suddenly clicked into place. The shower turned off. His footsteps moved closer. I stepped away from the counter, returning to the sink, pretending to be drying another dish. My face was calm in the reflection of the window. Too calm, I remember thinking. A still pond hiding a storm beneath. He walked into the kitchen, towel around his waist, hair dripping onto the floor. "You seen my phone?" he asked casually. I handed it to him without looking up. "Don't forget it again," I said quietly. He nodded, oblivious, tapping his password into the screen. My world hadn't broken. Not yet. It had simply shifted, quietly, decisively, into a place where the truth finally had a voice. And I was finally listening. The perfume had been the first thing, long before the texts, long before the missed calls, long before the silence in his eyes became louder than his words. It was soft, floral, and expensive in a way that clung to fabric longer than it should. The first night I smelled it, he came home later than usual, laughing at some joke he claimed his colleagues told during a quick drink after work. He kissed my cheek, and that unfamiliar scent brushed against my skin like a warning I didn't yet know how to read. I asked lightly what perfume it was. He shrugged and said someone in the office wore it. "Probably walked past me," he said, barely making eye contact. I believed him then. Or maybe I pretended to. It's easy to accept the simplest answer when the alternative is something you can't imagine yet. But once I saw the messages from T. Redheart, that scent became a breadcrumb trail leading backward through every moment I had overlooked. I remembered the time he came home already showered, saying the gym had been crowded and he didn't want to bring the sweat inside. Except he didn't smell like sweat. He smelled like that perfume, light, lingering, too delicate to be from any gym. He tossed his clothes into the laundry basket and said he was starving. I made dinner. He complimented the meal. And I tried to forget how quickly he had rushed into the bathroom that evening, as if trying to wash something off before I could notice. Then there was the jacket. The one he wore on days he said he had client lunches. I had taken it to the dry cleaner one morning because a small stain near the cuff bothered me. When I picked it up from the counter, the woman handed it to me with a smile. "This perfume is lovely," she said. "Your scent." Froze. "Mine." Echoed. She nodded. "It's lingering on the collar. Must be a strong one." I told her it wasn't mine. I told myself it must have been transfer from a coworker's hug, or a crowded elevator, or a meeting room filled with people who didn't understand personal space. I told myself many things because the truth requires courage. Courage I didn't have then. But after seeing those texts, I began revisiting each of these small moments like puzzle pieces laid out on a table. Pieces that had never made sense until now. The perfume on the jacket. The rushed showers. The little smiles at his phone. The sudden interest in clothes he hadn't cared about in years. All of it painted a silhouette of a woman I didn't know but somehow recognized. T became more than a letter. She became the outline behind the scent I had smelled on him again and again, each time trusting him more than my own intuition. I sat on our bed one night, holding the shirt he wore the day before. I lifted it to my face, inhaling the faint trace of that same perfume. It wasn't strong anymore, just a whisper, but it was enough. She wore something with jasmine and a hint of amber. Something elegant, intentional, confident. The kind of scent you choose carefully to be remembered by. I realized, with a quiet ache, that she had been walking beside him long before I understood she existed. She had left traces of herself in our home, on his clothes, in the spaces between his excuses. And I had been breathing them in without knowing. Now I knew. And now, the pieces no longer scattered. They pointed toward a truth I could no longer unsee. The nights became longer after that. I didn't announce my suspicions or question him outright. Instead, I waited until the house settled into its familiar quiet, the kind that made every small sound feel amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, his soft snoring drifting from the bedroom. And then, in that stillness, I opened my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that everything in my body told me the truth was out there, hiding in plain sight. I started with the obvious. Social media. Not his, he was too careful for that. But the name T. Red Heart kept replaying in my mind, a heartbeat I couldn't silence. I went through his following list, scrolling slowly, searching for any woman whose name began with a T. Dozens appeared. Influencers, co-workers, friends of friends. But none of them felt right. Too polished. Too distant. Too disconnected from the perfume that still lingered in the fibers of his shirts. Then I widened the search. Tagged photos. Comments he left on posts. People he followed recently. It felt obsessive at first, but the more I uncovered, the more I realized it wasn't madness. It was clarity. One profile kept appearing in the suggested for you section, as if the algorithm itself recognized the cracks in my marriage before I did. Her name didn't start with T, but she used an initial in her handle. A single letter styled with a red heart. Her photos were bright, glamorous, and curated the way younger women present their lives, carefully staged to look effortless. She was younger, much younger. The kind who posted mirror selfies with perfect lighting. Plates of food from places he claimed he'd been for client dinners. Cocktail photos with captions like, "Life tastes better at midnight." A woman who seemed to live in dimly lit restaurants, bars with polished brass fixtures, hotels with velvet chairs, and rooftops overlooking the city. But she never posted the man beside her. Just the teasers. 2 glasses on the table, a hand she cropped out, shadows and reflections. Until one night she made a mistake. It was buried in a carousel of photos from a Thursday night outing. The first images were harmless. Her in a glittery dress, her drink, her dessert. But the fourth photo was taken at the edge of a booth. You could only see part of the table and a slice of her smile as she leaned in close to someone just out of frame. And then I saw it. The cuff of a shirt. White with a thin navy stripe. My husband owned that shirt. Not just owned it, wore it every time he wanted to impress someone. He'd worn it for anniversaries, for dinners with friends, even the night he proposed to me. I zoomed in, staring at the stitching, the slight fray at the corner where he always fiddled with it. There was no doubt, no room for excuses, no possibility it belonged to anyone else. That shirt had been beside her, inches from her glittery dress. Resting on the same booth where she smiled like she had everything she wanted, everything she believed she deserved. My heart didn't break. It hardened. I clicked through more of her photos, watching the puzzle assemble itself. Perfume. The nights out. The mysteriously timed posts. The surgically cropped corners where a man's presence was erased but not gone. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was illuminated on a glowing screen at 2 a.m., reflected in my eyes as I stared at the woman who had stepped into my life without ever stepping into my home. I didn't cry. Not that night. Because truths like this don't bring tears, they bring clarity. It didn't happen in a burst of anger. There was no shouting, no dramatic breaking of dishes, no late-night confrontation where I hurled accusations under dim kitchen lights. Hurt doesn't always explode. Sometimes it settles quietly, like dust on a forgotten shelf. And that is exactly how the plan formed. Slowly, silently, in the quiet space between betrayal and clarity. In the days after discovering the photo, I watched him with a kind of detached curiosity, as if I were studying a stranger who happened to live in my house. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, humming, checking his phone, pretending everything was as it always had been. He didn't notice my silence because he had stopped listening to it long ago. That realization stung more deeply than anything else. I didn't want revenge. Revenge requires rage, and I didn't have rage left in me. What I had was something smaller, more delicate, a need for recognition. I wanted him, for once, to feel the discomfort he had so effortlessly planted in my life. The knot in the stomach, the unease in the chest. The spinning sensation of not knowing what would happen next. I wanted him to experience that for a few hours. To live in the same tension I had lived in for weeks. The opportunity presented itself in the simplest way. One evening, while he changed into his gym clothes, I went into the bathroom to tidy up after his shower. His pill bottle sat next to the sink, exactly where it always did. The amber plastic caught the light. I picked it up, turning it gently in my hand. It was warm from the steam in the room. He depended on those pills. Not medically, not truly. They were mild anxiety tablets, something the doctor had prescribed years ago when work stress had begun to overwhelm him. He said they helped him feel balanced. Every night at 9 without fail. He tapped 2 into his palm and swallowed them with water. The routine was so ingrained it had become second nature. My hand trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing I was stepping into a moment that would change everything. I opened the cabinet and found what I knew was there. A bottle of laxatives I kept for emergencies, tucked behind the extra towels. This wasn't hatred. Hatred consumes you. This was precision. A small, controlled correction in the balance he had disturbed. I poured the pills onto the countertop, separating the ones he needed from the ones he didn't. The real pills slid smoothly into a small container I tucked into my pocket. The laxatives replaced them, almost identical in size and color. The bottle looked unchanged when I shook it lightly, as if nothing had happened, as if everything was still normal. But my breathing was not normal. My pulse was not normal. My hands were trembling, not from guilt, but from the quiet intensity of doing something I never imagined myself capable of. As I placed the bottle back exactly where it had been, I whispered, not loudly, not bitterly, just honestly. Feel something. Not pain. Not suffering. Just something real. When he walked in moments later, towel over his shoulder, he didn't see the shift in the air. He kissed my forehead, absent-minded and distracted, already thinking about the gym session he had planned. He didn't notice the way I stepped aside, the way my fingers brushed my pocket where the real pills rested. He trusted me with his routines, with his necessities, with his comfort. And for the first time I held that trust differently. Not to harm him, but to let him sit, if only for one night, in the discomfort he had so carelessly woven into my quiet life. He had taken something from me without asking. Now, in my trembling hands, I took something back. The moment itself felt strangely ordinary, almost disappointingly simple. There was no dramatic music swelling in the background, no shaking hands hovering over the pill bottle like in a movie. Just me standing in the bathroom, the quiet hum of the extractor fan filling the air, and the soft glow of the vanity light reflecting off the mirror. Everything was calm. Everything was still. And in that stillness, the switch became inevitable. The amber bottle sat on the counter exactly as it always did, its white cap slightly worn from years of twisting on and off. I picked it up, and for a second I simply held it, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. My heartbeat didn't race. Settled. A steady, controlled rhythm that matched the way I'd made every decision leading to this moment. What I was doing wasn't born from chaos. It was born from clarity. I unscrewed the cap, hearing the soft click as the seal broke. Inside, the pills sat like tiny secrets he trusted me to protect. For years, I had handled them with care, counted them, refilled them when needed, reminded him if he forgot. It was a quiet responsibility I never questioned. That trust had once meant something sacred. Now it felt like a tool he never imagined I would use. I poured the pills onto the counter, creating a small pile of beige tablets. They looked harmless, almost innocent. I picked through them slowly, setting aside the real pills one by one. They clicked gently against the porcelain as I placed them into the small container I had waiting, a simple plastic cup with a lid, tucked into the back of a drawer beneath the towels. When the bottle was empty, I opened the new one, the laxatives. They were nearly identical in shape and color, so close that even I had to squint for a moment to distinguish them. That was the point. Quiet, simple, untraceable. I let the new pills tumble into the bottle, the sound soft and steady, like rain tapping against a window. Nothing about the act felt rushed. Nothing felt reckless. I shook the bottle lightly, Just enough for the pills to settle into place the way he expected. The same weight. The same sound. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would ever make him look twice. As I screwed the cap back on, I felt no guilt, no spike of adrenaline. Just a calm certainty. This wasn't revenge. Revenge burns hot, consumes everything in its path. What I felt was cool, controlled, measured. A lesson, not to destroy him, but to remind him that actions ripple outward, touching people he never considered. I placed the bottle back on the bathroom shelf exactly where it belonged, aligning it perfectly with the other toiletries so it looked untouched. My hand smoothed the edge of the shelf, an unconscious gesture of closure. Then I closed the cabinet door and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a woman plotting. I looked like a woman reclaiming her place in her own life. He trusted me with this routine. He trusted me with his comfort. He trusted me with the small rituals that kept him steady. And in the quiet precision of that switch, I finally felt steady too. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Just certain. He would learn something tonight. Something small but unforgettable. A gentle reminder that discomfort, when earned, can be a teacher. The morning of his so-called meeting. He woke up with a strange kind of enthusiasm, the kind he rarely showed for actual work. He moved through the house with a lightness in his step, humming under his breath as if the day ahead promised something more exciting than spreadsheets and conference calls. I watched him from the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and studied the little signals he didn't realize he was giving away. He took longer than usual picking out his clothes. Not the casual button-downs he wore to normal meetings. No, he ironed a crisp white shirt, smoothing it with the same care he used to reserve for special occasions. He paired it with a navy blazer he hadn't touched in months. I remembered buying that blazer with him years ago. He said it made him feel younger, sharper. The irony wasn't lost on me now. When he came down the hallway, I caught the scent before I saw him. A cologne I didn't recognize, bold with notes of amber and something musky underneath. It was not the scent I gifted him last Christmas, or the one he claimed to love because it smelled like home. This scent was different. New, confident, chosen for someone else's gaze, not mine. He paused in front of the mirror near the entryway, adjusting his collar, running a hand through his hair with more care than he used to show for me. His reflection looked almost youthful, as if he were preparing for a date rather than a negotiation. But I didn't react. I didn't raise an eyebrow. I didn't ask him where he was going or why he dressed like a man trying to impress someone. Instead, I simply watched quietly, taking in every detail, every unnecessary flourish. "You're heading out early," I said finally, my tone light, unreadable. "Yeah," he replied, slipping his watch onto his wrist. "Big meeting today. Could go late." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. Familiar pattern by now. Lies rarely survive direct eye contact. I nodded, as if the explanation made sense. "Good luck," I said softly. "Thanks," he answered, distracted, already slipping his phone into his pocket like it was an extension of his body. The same phone that still held messages from T. Redheart. The same phone he guarded more fiercely than any secret in his life. As he stepped into his polished shoes, the ones he wore when he wanted to look successful, important, wanted, I felt my breath settle into a calm rhythm. There was no rage, no panic, just a quiet awareness that today was the day. The switch had already been set in motion. Fate, disguised as discomfort, would take the lead from here. He kissed my cheek before leaving, the gesture hollow, almost habitual. The cologne lingered on my skin long after he pulled away. He walked to the door with an eagerness that confirmed everything I already knew. He wasn't heading to a meeting. He was heading to her. He didn't realize I knew. He didn't realize I saw everything now, every detail he tried so hard to hide. But I didn't follow him. I didn't trail behind with trembling hands or a heart begging for answers. I simply watched the door close behind him, listened to his footsteps fade down the walkway, and allowed the silence of the house to settle around me. Because I didn't need to see where he went. Already knew. And today, for the first time, I wasn't the one waiting in uncertainty. I was the one he should be afraid to disappoint. I didn't need to follow him. I didn't need to call a friend to track him or pretend to run errands near the restaurant district. His lover's social media had become a window into the nights he thought were hidden from me, and all I had to do was open the app and watch the story unfold in real time. She was predictable in her posting habits, carefully curated glimpses of her life meant to look spontaneous. A woman like her didn't go out without announcing it to an audience. And sure enough, barely an hour after he left the house, her profile lit up with a new story. The first clip was a boomerang of 2 champagne glasses clinking together. The camera panned just enough to catch her manicured hand, the shimmer of her jewelry, and the soft glow of the restaurant lights behind her. 2 glasses, 2 people. I kept my expression still, not allowing even the smallest flicker of emotion to cross my face. The next post was a photo of a plate of oysters arranged like delicate sculptures. She captioned it, "Starting the night right sparkles." It was the kind of caption she always used. Light, playful, vaguely suggestive. He hated oysters. He used to say they tasted like seawater pretending to be food. Yet here they were, perfectly arranged in front of her, shared with someone who didn't even like them. I absorbed each detail with a quiet, steady breath. Another story appeared, this one shakier, as if she'd filmed it without thinking. The camera tilted toward the restaurant's large windows. The city lights outside cast reflections across the glass, and there, almost hidden, was the faint outline of a man's shoulder and the crisp white shirt he'd ironed that morning. It wasn't a clear shot. She'd cropped him out with thoughtless precision, capturing just enough of him to prove he was there without betraying his identity. But I recognized the reflection instantly. It was strange, watching them move through their evening like actors in a play I had already read the ending to. She filmed the dessert, a molten chocolate cake oozing in the center. A close-up of her smile. A brief shot of her fingers brushing someone's arm just out of frame. And then, as I expected, the post stopped. They always did around the same time. Right when the night shifted from the part she wanted the world to see to the part she wanted to keep for herself. But I knew something she didn't. The switch had already begun. The pills he took before leaving would settle into his system soon enough. The glittering evening she filmed so proudly would not end the way she imagined. I set my phone down and let out a slow, measured breath, the kind that breaks the surface of still water. Chaos was coming for them, quietly at first, then all at once. But I wasn't watching with malice or satisfaction. I watched with a kind of strange detachment, like someone observing a storm from behind reinforced glass. They were dancing toward an ending neither of them expected. And I was the only one who knew the weather was about to change. I didn't have to be there to know exactly when the first cramp hit him. I'd lived with that man long enough to predict every expression, every twitch of discomfort, every subtle shift in his posture when something wasn't right. So while I sat at home in the quiet glow of the living room lamp, I allowed myself to imagine the scene unfolding across town with perfect clarity. The restaurant they loved, her favorite really, was the kind that dimmed its lights to make the plates look more elegant, the kind that played soft music to disguise whispered conversations. I pictured him seated across from her in one of those high-backed velvet booths, leaning in with a smile he reserved for the woman he thought made him feel alive again. He would have taken the first few bites of dinner casually, maybe even confidently, believing he had the entire evening ahead of him. Then the shift, subtle at first, a tightening across his jaw. A hand placed low on his abdomen under the table, like a man adjusting his shirt when in truth he was trying to settle something that refused to settle. A small bead of sweat forming near his hairline, brushing it away with the back of his hand and blaming it on the warmth of the room. He'd try to hide it. He always hid discomfort, out of pride, out of stubbornness, out of the belief that nothing could touch him if he simply willed himself strong enough. I'd seen the same expression when he pushed through stomach aches, headaches, anything that made him look less put together. But laxatives have no sympathy for ego. I could almost see him shifting in his seat, adjusting, crossing one leg over the other, then uncrossing it moments later. His shoulders would tense. He'd roll them back, hoping the movement would somehow ease the pressure growing inside him. His lover, with her expensive perfume and glittery smile, might laugh at something she said, completely unaware of the storm building just beneath his neatly ironed shirt. Maybe she'd reach across the table to touch his hand. Maybe he'd pull away too quickly, trying to mask it with a joke. But discomfort has a way of stealing confidence. It creeps up the spine, tightens the throat, blurs the edges of your composure. The second wave would hit harder. A sharp, unmistakable cramp that forces stillness. A widening of the eyes. A slow inhale he'd try to hide by lifting his glass to his lips. He'd swallow champagne like medicine, hoping it would soothe something it could never soothe. And then he'd excuse himself, too quickly, too abruptly, murmuring something about checking his phone or washing his hands. His steps would be faster than he intended. His face would flush. His breath would come shallow as he realized this wasn't a passing discomfort. He was losing control of a night he thought he had planned perfectly. And I sat miles away, calm, steady, knowing the moment had arrived. Not revenge. Just consequence. Just the first crack in the illusion he thought he built so carefully. The first tremor in a night that was about to unravel in ways he never imagined. The first sign that things were shifting came through silence. Her social media, once a steady stream of filtered lights and carefully posed moments, suddenly went still. No new boomerangs of dessert forks, no half-lit selfies, no pictures of wine glasses raised toward the city skyline. Just 20 long minutes of nothing, an unusual break for someone who documented her life as if the world might forget her if she stopped posting. Then, one by one, the earlier stories began disappearing. The champagne glasses vanished first. Then the oysters. Then the dimly lit dessert that she had proudly captioned. It was like watching someone sweep away crumbs after dropping a dish, trying desperately to erase the evidence before someone else noticed. I stood by the kitchen window, watering my plants. The gentle trickle from the watering can far calmer than anything unfolding in that restaurant. The steam from my mug of tea fogged the glass slightly. Outside, the evening was peaceful. Inside, everything felt still, almost serene. While somewhere across town, the storm I had quietly set in motion began to swallow them. I imagined the scene as clearly as if I had been standing at the restaurant entrance. He would have tried to stand from the booth when the third wave of cramps hit. Sharp, undeniable, inescapable. His face would have twisted, his hand clutching the edge of the table for support. His lover, confused at first, would have leaned in, whispering something meant to sound comforting but laced with panic when he didn't respond. When he finally rose to walk to the restroom, I pictured him gripping the back of a chair for balance. The pressure would have been too much. His body refusing to cooperate. He'd take a step, then another, and then everything would go blurry. The world tilting. His legs trembling. The room spinning around him as the diner's conversations grew distant and muffled. He didn't make it. A man doesn't collapse quietly. Chairs scrape. Glasses tip. Someone gasps. Another shouts for help. In a restaurant like that, chaos is loud, unmistakable. I imagined him hitting the floor, knees buckling first, then the weight of his body folding under him. His lover would have screamed, sharp, shrill, the scream of someone who had never seen real consequences before. A sound that cuts through even the softest music and makes every head turn. A waiter, probably the youngest one, would have rushed forward. Another would grab a phone to call emergency services. Diners would whisper behind their hands, staring without meaning to, watching the drama unfold like something staged for their entertainment. And she, his lover, would be kneeling beside him, hands shaking, voice cracking as she tried to shake him awake, calling his name like she had known how to say it with love. Tears streaking her makeup. Fear tightening her throat. An ambulance was called. Sirens were summoned to deal with the disaster none of them understood. Meanwhile, I adjusted a plant near the window, trimming a small wilted leaf, allowing the calm of the moment to settle deeper into my bones. My plants thrived on care, attention, consistency. All the things he had freely given elsewhere without a second thought. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't revel in his humiliation. I simply continued watering the soil, letting each drop sink in slowly. The night outside remained soft. The air remained warm. Nothing about my world spun out of control. Not anymore. While their chaos filled a restaurant, mine dissolved quietly into peace. The first call came just as I was settling onto the couch, my tea still steaming in my hands. His name lit up the screen, bold and familiar, the same name that used to make my heart soften without effort. This time, I watched it blink against the darkened room, the vibration rattling softly on the coffee table. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for it. I simply let it ring until the sound dissolved into silence. A moment later, it buzzed again, this time her number. I recognized it from the messages I had seen on his forgotten phone, the same number that once carried flirtatious emojis and secrets meant to be hidden from me. Now it flashed with urgency, the vibration more frantic. I imagined her hands shaking as she dialed me, her voice panicked, mascara streaking her cheeks, desperation coloring her every breath. I placed my tea gently on the table and let the call ring out. Then came the third call. Unknown caller. Ambulance protocol, perhaps. Hospital line. Or the restaurant manager trying to reach the emergency contact listed in his phone. I watched the screen glow, listened to the buzz echo softly through the room, and for a moment I closed my eyes. The sound wasn't unnerving. It was strangely distant, like hearing someone else's alarm in another apartment. Something that didn't belong to me. Outside, if I listened carefully, I could hear faint sirens weaving through the city, high-pitched and urgent. They grew louder, then softer, as if tracing the edges of our neighborhood before disappearing again into the night. It struck me how fitting it was. An ambulance carrying the consequences of choices he made without hesitation, without thought, without concern for the person he vowed to love. I leaned back into the cushions, pulling the blanket over my knees, feeling the warmth settle around me in a way that felt grounding. My home felt different that night. Not hollow, not heavy, just quiet, peaceful. A space unburdened by the weight of pretending everything was fine. The phone vibrated again and again, sometimes his name, sometimes hers. Sometimes numbers the phone didn't recognize. I watched each call without reacting, the way someone might watch raindrops slide down a window. Present, observable, but requiring no response. My tea cooled slowly on the table, untouched now, its fragrance mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the candle I had lit earlier. I thought about all the nights I had answered his calls without hesitation, the times I rearranged my life to soothe his stress, to reassure him, to make space for him. And how easily he had filled his empty spaces with someone else. Tonight, the silence between rings spoke louder than anything I could have said. They wanted me to break, panic, care. But I didn't owe chaos any more pieces of myself. The phone buzzed once more, the sound vibrating through the wood of the table. I didn't look away this time. I just let it ring and ring and ring, until even the phone seemed to accept that I had nothing left to give to this moment except quiet. And quiet finally was mine. I woke to a room washed in pale morning light, the kind that makes everything look softer than it truly is. My phone lay on the nightstand where I'd left it, screen dark, no longer vibrating with the frantic rhythm of the night before. For a moment, I simply stared at it, the silence in the room thicker than any worry I used to feel when he didn't come home on time. I stretched, breathed slowly, and let the calm settle into my bones before finally reaching for the device. There were missed calls. Dozens of them. His name. The lover's number. Unknown numbers. And then one voicemail from a calm, unfamiliar voice that sounded too professional, too controlled to belong to anyone involved in last night's unraveling. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I waited, brushed my hair, brewed my morning tea, opened the curtains. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply a choice to move at my own pace for once. When the phone rang again, I was ready. This time it wasn't frantic. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of ring that carried authority. I answered on the third ring, pressing the phone gently to my ear. "Good morning, is this Mrs. Turner?" The voice was steady, clipped, almost rehearsed. A hospital nurse or administrator. I could tell instantly. "Yes," I said, my own voice calm even. "This is she. I'm calling from Glendale Memorial Hospital regarding your husband. He was admitted late last night." I let a beat pass. "I see." The woman continued, her tone informative, detached in the way medical staff learn to be. "Your husband experienced severe gastrointestinal distress complicated by dehydration. He collapsed at a restaurant and was brought in by ambulance. He's stable now, but we're monitoring him closely." Severe gastrointestinal distress. They made it sound so official, so clinical, like a condition that arrived uninvited rather than something he walked directly into through choices he made himself. "Is he conscious?" asked, keeping my voice soft. "Yes, ma'am. He regained consciousness shortly after arrival. He's been asking for you. We'd like to discuss his condition further if you're able to come in." Another beat of silence. From me, not from uncertainty but from intention. I let her words settle, let the offer hang in the air like a branch I didn't need to reach for. "Is he stable?" I repeated. "Yes," she confirmed. "Then that's all I needed to know." My tone didn't waver. "Thank you for calling." She hesitated. "We do have a few questions and—" I ended the call before she could finish. Politely, cleanly, quietly. The phone dropped back onto the counter with a soft tap, and I stood there for a moment, absorbing the stillness returning around me. No panic, no racing heartbeat, just relief, not for his well-being, but for the clarity that filled the room like sunlight. He was stable. He was alive. His consequences had been immediate, physical, embarrassing, but not dangerous. My intention had never been to harm him. Only to let him feel, just once, the discomfort he had so casually woven into my days, my thoughts, my trust. I sipped my tea, warm and grounding, and looked out the window at a morning that held no chaos, no unanswered questions. The hospital could keep their version of the truth. I had lived mine. He came home just before sunset, moving with the uneven steps of a man whose pride was still limping behind him. I heard the door open, then slam shut with more force than necessary. His breathing was loud, uneven, the kind that came from holding anger in the throat for too long. I didn't rise to meet him. I stayed seated at the dining table, the soft glow of the lamp casting a gentle light across the room, making everything look calmer than he felt. When he stepped into the doorway, his face was a storm. Humiliation clung to him like sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled from hours in a hospital bed he never expected to occupy. He opened his mouth, but only fragments spilled out. "What happened last night?" he began. "Something was wrong with my pills. I don't know how, someone must have, the restaurant." His voice shook, flickered, collapsed into silence. He was furious, but beneath that fury, I recognized something else. Fear. A kind of fear he wasn't used to feeling. A fear he didn't want me to see. "Sit," I said quietly. He did. Not because he wanted to, but because something in my voice told him this wasn't a request. He tried again. "It must have been something I ate. Or maybe food poisoning. The doctors." "I know where you were," I said, cutting through his excuses with a calmness that made him flinch more than shouting ever could. "I know who you were with." His face went pale. His lips parted slightly, as if the air had been knocked out of him. He blinked once, twice, searching for a lie that could still save him. "There's no one else," he said weakly. "You know I've been stressed. Work has been." I slid my phone across the table. On the screen was the photograph, the one of his shirt cuff reflected in the restaurant window. The cuff he had ironed that morning. The cuff he thought no one would notice. He stared at it, jaw tightening, and for the first time he didn't have a ready excuse. His fingers twitched beside the phone like they wanted to snatch it away, erase it, rewind the night. I didn't give him the chance. You've been with her for months, I continued softly. The dinners, the late nights, perfume, the messages from T, the stories she posted, all of it. His face twisted, anger, shame, denial all colliding at once. It's not what you think, he whispered, even though he knew exactly what it was. I stood up, walked to the cabinet, and returned with a small container, the one holding his real pills. I placed it on the table in front of him, gently, like it was something fragile. He stared at it, confusion giving way to horror. These, I said, my voice steady, are the pills you were supposed to take. His eyes lifted to mine, wide and frantic. You switched them. I corrected the balance, I replied. Just once. He pushed back in his chair, shaken. You could have hurt me. You've been hurting me for months, I said softly. I just let you feel a fraction of what you gave me. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, carved with truths he couldn't escape anymore. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. All the lies he had prepared suddenly felt too small to fit the moment. He finally whispered, "What do you want from me?" I looked at him, not with spite, not with triumph, but with clarity. "Nothing," I said. "Not anymore." And for the first time, he understood that the consequences he faced weren't the ones from the restaurant. They were the ones sitting across from him now. She didn't pack in a hurry. There was no frantic tossing of clothes into suitcases, no slammed drawers, no trail of chaos behind her. Instead, she folded each item with deliberate calm, placing them into boxes she'd bought earlier that morning. There was something strangely soothing about the process, removing her things one by one from a place that no longer felt like home. Every folded sweater, every book, every plant she carefully set aside made the air in the room feel lighter. He hovered in the hallway at first, watching her in stunned silence. He didn't yell. He didn't demand explanations. Maybe he finally understood that shouting wouldn't glue the pieces back together. That apologies, no matter how earnest they sounded, couldn't unbreak what he had cracked with months of deceit. He leaned against the doorframe, shoulders slumped, voice barely above a whisper when he asked, "So, this is it?" She didn't look at him right away. She taped a box shut, smoothing the tape with her palm, letting the question hang in the air between them. When she finally met his eyes, her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was simply done. "This ended a long time ago," she said softly. "I'm just finally stepping out of the ruins." He swallowed hard, as if trying to find words that could save something already beyond saving. But she didn't wait for him to speak. She didn't need him to. Every explanation he could offer had already been undone by the nights he spent elsewhere, the lies woven into their home, the perfume she inhaled that didn't belong to her. She carried the first box to the door. He moved as if to help, but she shook her head. "No," she said. "This part one do on my own." The apartment she rented was small, smaller than the home she shared with him, smaller than the life she once imagined, but it felt warm the moment she stepped inside. Bright morning light poured through sheer curtains. The wooden floors creaked softly, the way old spaces do when they're ready to hold new stories. She filled the living room with plants, lavender on the windowsill, pothose trailing from a shelf, a fiddle leaf fig in the corner like a quiet guardian. Green life in every direction, growing toward the sunlight without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, she inhaled fully. No tension gripping her spine. No second-guessing. No checking the clock to see when he'd come home. Just quiet. Just breath. Just herself. The final box sat by the door, her last trip. She lifted it gently, balanced it on her hip, and stepped out onto the hallway landing. Behind her, the apartment door clicked shut with soft finality. Sometimes endings are loud. But sometimes they are simply a woman locking the door to a life that no longer fits. She paused, her hand resting on the handle, the echo of everything she had endured humming softly inside her. Then, in a whisper only the empty hallway heard, she said, "Sometimes pain grows you, but letting go frees you." And with that, she walked toward a future she chose for herself. Steady, quiet, and beautifully her own.